Thank you so much for sharing a bit more about yourself and what you've learned from that experience. I want to pick up on something you said towards the end about sort of being involved in the community, and you talked a little bit about economic development, and I know sort of the economic development of Southern California and Los Angeles has been important to you in your various roles through the years, but talk a little bit as a business person. I think sometimes we don't do a very good job of sort of understanding as business people how we should be involved in our communities from an economic development perspective. What are some of the things you've done? How have you engaged in that, and how might you encourage those in the audience to do that, whether it's some of them are in smaller, more local communities as opposed to sort of a big LA, but how has that worked for you, and how might people think about engaging in that way?
Sure. Yeah, this has become a cause for me that I focus a fair amount of energy on. Because I figured out after a while that for the most part, people in government, unless you're Mike Bloomberg, or a handful, there definitely are others. Michael Bennett from Colorado is a good example. But for the most part, people that you come across in government have never worked in the private sector, or they've worked there very briefly. And therefore, through no fault of their own, they don't really have much appreciation for what it takes to create jobs. And I got particularly involved in that with Mayor Villaraigosa. Maybe that's a place to start. And the mayor and I cooked up a kind of blue ribbon committee called the Los Angeles Coalition for the Economy and Jobs. And we put together a terrific bipartisan, diverse group, labor, business, nonprofits. And our goal, this is 2008, the beginning of 2008, and the city of LA, of course, had no money to spend, and that was okay. We said, let's come up with ideas for how can city government foster economic and job growth. And we came up as a group, there were about 25 of us and a small staff. And the mayor was great, the staff that he had was great. We came up with 100 ideas. The website's still up. I think it's www.laejc.org, I think is what it is. And so I guess we started in 06, and I delivered the report to him in January of 08. And I remember saying to him before we did the press conference, and he was very good at press conferences, you're the only mayor in America at a time when this economy is starting to crack with a plan, a blueprint to foster job and economic growth. And he was very enthusiastic about it. But basically, 18 months, 2 years later, out of the 100 ideas, they had implemented none. So that was a little disappointing. And we formed this LA coalition that you mentioned. Same kind of concept, bipartisan, Republicans, Democrats, labor, nonprofits, business. And what we're trying to do is educate political leaders and foster attention on issues. There are so many things government can do that can help grow the economy. I mean, I'll give you an example. You may not realize this, but LAX, your favorite neighborhood airport, is the second biggest job generator in Southern California. And it's owned by the city of Los Angeles. If you can attract one daily international flight to Los Angeles, the economic analysis is that one flight, 365 days a year, generates 3,000 jobs. But we have, what, 11, 12% unemployment in LA County. So to the credit of the Villaraigosa administration, they got the Bradley West terminal. I don't know if everybody's seen it. It's beautiful, it's fabulous. I flew in the other night, and as I was going by, I saw not one, not two, but 3 A380s. That's you guys all know what that is. 3 A380s, including British Airways has just added an A380. And they were at LAX, and they were offloading their passengers, not kind of some remote field, take a bus and try to find your luggage, but in the new Bradley terminal. So those 3 flights, that's 9,000 jobs. I could go on probably much longer than you want me to about the airport, but so there's still a lot of issues about the airport that are open, and that's just one out of the 100. But unless there are voices in our community who push political leaders to do the right thing, they'll fold to the NIMBYs. That's the story of the airport. 500 people in Westchester screaming, "We're shocked there's an airport right near our house. Don't expand it. Don't let anything happen." And you've got to have people who don't have a particular axe to grind, but do have an interest in the broader benefits to the whole community, speaking up. And so that's what we've tried to do, is draw attention to these issues and frankly put some pressure on political leaders to do the right thing, not just bend to the craven self-interest of some noisy group.
So I've got one more question for him, and then we'll open it to the audience, and you guys can ask him what you would like to. So I'm going to pull us out, because you're sort of talking about kind of the political climate and everything. You were just in Washington, D.C. earlier this week. I think you were in a meeting that Janet Yellen was in. What advice would you give Washington right now to sort of move us forward and make some progress on the issues that they're trying to deal with that don't seem to be moving very quickly in resolving some of them?
How much time have we got?
You have about 3 minutes to answer that question.
You know, look, I think as somebody who focuses a lot of energy on the economy,
Right.
I think it's outrageous that the government's shut down and that the debt ceiling is a question mark. And there are ways to deal with the issues, whether you don't like the health care plan or you want the government to be smaller. I appreciate that, you know, some people feel they have to use these tactics, but the cost of these tactics to the people of the United States, the people they allegedly are serving, if you take your responsibility to be not just to the voters in your primary, but that you swear an oath of allegiance to the United States of America, then to just take one example, and Paige Jenkins is sitting out there, he knows something about bonds as well as I do. Short-term interest rates are going up already. The United States has $16 trillion of debt. I know a little something about loaning money to people. If you have some doubts about the creditworthiness of the person borrowing money from you, but you're still willing to loan them the money, the interest rate goes up. That's happening now to the United States of America needlessly. We have tremendous capacity to meet our debt obligations. Now, no congressman is going to be voted out of office, I guess, or they don't think they will. They think the American people are too stupid to notice that maybe we'll pay another 1/4 of a point in interest. If we blow through this, if we don't extend the debt ceiling, maybe we'll pay 100 basis points, 200 basis points. Nobody quite knows. But you guys are good at math. What's 100 basis points times $16 trillion? Is that really an expense a responsible congressman or senator really wants to stick on the American people? So I think there are certain things you take off the table. You know, when I want to get my way in a meeting at City National Bank, I do not bring in a bazooka. I do not threaten to fire people in the room. You find ways to get what you want as a leader without bringing out nuclear weapons. And the House Republicans, in my view, are playing with nuclear weapons. And so my advice would be they should find other ways to be heard. The sequester was very effective. There are other devices but in the end, our system of government depends on compromise and balance and a level of responsibility. And at the moment, we're not seeing that in Washington.
Have you ever thought about running for political office?
And I've rejected it.
Okay.
Have you ever looked at what it's like to run for political
I think
office?
that's why a lot of people that probably should don't. So
Yeah,
absolutely.
you're right.
It's a tough job. What questions do we have from the audience? Yes.
Thank you so much for being here. My name's
Oh, let's do the microphone. So we actually have folks watching and listening online, so we want them to be able to hear.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. You touched on the culture of excellence that kind of forces the poor performers to migrate out. And I was wondering if you can be more specific about maybe certain attributes or control systems that fosters that culture.
Well, I guess maybe you're asking two things. One, we try to build a culture. There's actually a book that I think is worth reading called Top Grading, and it's a phrase we use in our business, where you look at, if you have 10 people that report to you, stack rank their performance, and then look hard at who's number 10. And I think the first thing you try to do is, can you help number 10 move up the ladder? We're big on ladders at City National.
You actually have one on your lapel, I noticed.
That's actually our logo.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And that's a whole other story if you want.
You can tell that later.
Okay, thank you. So I think part of it is getting managers at every level to think in terms of stack ranking and have a plan for everyone on that ladder. I think you have a responsibility to the people that work in the company to help them achieve their full professional potential. I talk about that a lot. We talk about that a lot. We do a lot of things to help our colleagues achieve their full professional potential. But if you give somebody training, you give them coaching, you give them mentoring, you give them the tools, maybe you change their job. Sometimes they're a terrific person, but they're in the wrong job. We've had a number of success stories where somebody was failing in job 1 and they are very successful in job 2 or 3. But at some point, you've got to be clear-eyed about it. And if they're really going to never move out of the 10 slot, then go find somebody else. And they're probably better off. They should go somewhere where they're a better fit. So I think that's what you were asking me about, and that's what we try to do. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, let's go here, and then we'll come back up here. So right here and then back here.
Throughout your career, what was the most challenging decision you had to make?
Well, that's a tough question. I don't know if there's one. I think that the sort of the forks in the road that I described would be, I'll give you 2 categories. One were forks in the road. When I decided, I had a bad boss at the law firm I was at, and I decided I wasn't going to lead my life that way. And I was 29 years old when I made up my mind to go start a law firm with 2 guys. I look back on it, I spent an entire year making no money. I'm not quite sure how I got through that year. I got married that year too. That wasn't how I got through the year. So that was a tough decision, but it was the right decision. And a couple, when I decided to give up practicing law and go to Lorimar, that was a tough decision for me. And when I decided to give up basically being in the entertainment and media world and go into the bank, those were 3 key pivot points for me. But the other decision that I think was easy but really important, when I started out practicing law, I remember the first time I had to give bad news to a client. When he said, what's your honest opinion about X? And I did my homework, and I knew that the answer that I believed to be correct was not going to make this guy happy, and I might lose him as a client. And I didn't have that many clients. And I kind of looked myself in the eye and said, you know what? If this guy's paying me for my honest advice, my best judgment, and that's how I'm going to lead my life. And if I lose the client, so be it. But that lesson has stood me in good stead, to try to be as honest and accurate and straightforward, and it has a lot of positives.
Very good. Back here.
Hello, my name is Laurent Bishop, 20-month MBA student. Thank you for your candid nature. It seems that 1995 was a pivotal time in your career for enterprise leadership in terms of your transition and your career path. And a great deal of management enterprise leadership is navigating through uncertainty and setting a goal and not necessarily knowing where that goal is going to lead you. I was hoping that you could maybe give us some key points on, setting a vision and a goal and striving towards, that goal in the midst of uncertainty.
Well, great question. As I tried to try to touch on, I think you have to try to have a vision for where you're going, both for yourself in your own career and whether you're managing a unit or you're managing a company or a family, for that matter. You know, we focus a lot on planning, and I spend a lot of energy trying to think about, you know, where are we going, what's happening, how does it affect things. I think it's a collaborative process. I mean, as it happens, tomorrow we start a 3-day management retreat, and we do it the old-fashioned way. We don't leave town, we don't go to a hotel, we save money. But getting yourself out of the day-to-day and trying to think of larger questions, try to anticipate 2 or 3 years down the road, and trying to do it as honestly and candidly as you can. What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? What are the problems? And we involve our senior management team in that, and then try to drive that kind of process through the organization in a variety of ways. And we have other devices we've used, so it's not just a once-a-year thing. They're kind of a continual process, maybe less intense at times. So I think you just have to, I think the Soviet Union demonstrated that the 5-year plan is not necessarily the greatest way to run something. So I think, you know, you establish a plan, but you have to constantly be prepared to adjust to changing circumstances, changing perceptions. But try to keep staying focused and stay true to the values that got you there in the first place.
Yeah. And then we'll come over here. Back here and then over to my right.
I was just wondering, wanted to get your thoughts on your mindset and the bank going through the financial crisis, because I think City National came through stronger than ever. And I just wanted to get your opinion on, did you feel like at the start of it and through it, this was a great opportunity for the bank? Did you know you'd be all right? Was there points of worry? Just your thoughts.
You know, in hindsight, it's interesting to look back on it. In October of 2008, the world seemed to be cratering. And I picked up the Wall Street Journal, like lots of people, and read about the Treasury Secretary calling in the 19 biggest financial institutions and saying, you're going to take this money and you're not going to leave this room till you take it. And if you don't take it, don't come back later and ask for it. That was pretty tough stuff. And I was on something called the Federal Advisory Council in 2008. So I had actually been with the Board of Governors in September of 2008 and had kind of an ugly feeling for what was ahead. And that combination made me, and should have made me, nervous about where the economy was going. The economy of the United States was cratering. And just to digress for a second on that, if you look at the fourth quarter of 2008, and this is a little statistical factoid for you MBA students, but when they announce GDP numbers, and I'm sure you guys watch that, except when the government shut down, they can't do the math. In January of 2009, when they announced GDP for the fourth quarter of 2008, if you're with me, they said it was -3%. But the Bureau of, I think it's Labor Statistics, whoever does that, they keep calculating there, the little munchkins over there, keep working on this for 2 more years, and they keep recalibrating. And it's only 2 years later, and they do this every quarter, this is their normal pattern. It's only 2 years later that they have the final number. Do you know what the final number for the fourth quarter of 2008, I like to say the last quarter of the George W. Bush administration was? -9%. We were hurtling to depression. So anybody who was paying attention had to be nervous and worried, and we were. At the same time, we had gone for years running our business in what we thought was a relatively conservative way. And yet I'll give you an example. We had bought a bank in Nevada, not the best timing, in 2007, and we had expected that Nevada values would go down somewhat. We'd been in Nevada. Mr. Kafka over there made a whole bunch of loans for us in Nevada, thank you very much. Anyway, this loan, which was a City National made loan, was on a piece of land that the guy bought for $35 million. And he put up $17.5 million cash, and we loaned him the other $17.5. Now, in the world of banking, as Mike can tell you, 50% loan to value is a very conservative loan. Do you know what the appraisal on that piece of sand was at the bottom? $4 million.
Wow.
So when you look at things like that, you have to be nervous. The good news is we tightened our belts. Talk about, to your question, we adjusted. Whatever our 3-year plan was in 2007 went out the window in 2009. We tightened our belts. We didn't take bonuses. We didn't do raises. We absorbed some losses, but we managed to stay profitable in every quarter of 2009. And then the economy started to stabilize in the kind of April, May period of 2009, and the FDIC started to take over banks, and we were in a position to buy banks. And you saw the story the other day on a much grander level, Warren Buffett talking about when you're strong and people are panicking and worried, that's when some great opportunities. So I think in the spring of 2009 is when we began to see that the economy wasn't going to go into depression and that we were going to be okay. We did our first FDIC deal in 2009. It was very successful for us. And we were off to the races.
We'll go here and then we'll come back to here.
Since you happen to mention the Wall Street Journal, what are the 3 most important sources of news that you rely upon?
Well, I'm a big newspaper reader. So I'd say one big source is newspapers. I think it's really important to talk to clients, and we do a lot of that. And just talking to people in general. But as was mentioned, I was in Washington. You get a lot of input from whether it's government officials, other bankers, certainly my colleagues in the bank, our board of directors. I think you just have to try to find as much information as possible for any number of reasons. Where's technology going? Are our bankers doing what they're supposed to be doing? Are our clients satisfied? Where are the problems? What about our colleagues? I mean, I think in any kind of leadership role, you've got to be eagerly asking questions and being part of a culture that encourages people to come forward with ideas and problems and opportunities. And fortunately, we've got a lot of talented people, and that brings forward a lot of information.
Right here. Can we have a microphone? Who's got right here?
I can probably hear them.
Mr. Goldsmith, I think we all appreciate your remarks. And by the way, Mr. Bush was an infielder, and he played a little soccer. I'm curious, in 2008, the focus was the banks were too large to fail. They're now larger than they were then. What do you think about that concept for the future? Are they too large to fail?
The biggest banks, really are at this point. If they were too big to fail in 2008, and they're bigger than ever. The country, I think we saw that, the country can't sustain the collapse of one of the biggest banks in the country. And I think that's behind some very good things that are in Dodd-Frank and Basel. The biggest banks should have more capital, and the new rules are driving them to have more capital. I mean, if you go back 2007, the biggest banks had less capital and more risk than City National Bank. They still have less capital and more risk than City National Bank. So I think a lot of the mechanisms in Dodd-Frank, whether it's more capital, whether it's looking at how to handle the collapse of a bank, the so-called living will, stronger regulation certainly is in place and happening. But I think we're still in the situation where if one of the biggest banks was on the brink of failing, the government would have to step in. You know, one of the ironies to me, and one of the things that points up what a bad job the banking industry did on public relations, most people think it's because of banks that this thing collapsed. But the truth of the matter is, think about what were the entities that failed. Lehman Brothers is usually the marker. That's not a bank. And oh, by the way, if Glass-Steagall had been in place, it wouldn't have helped at all. Bear Stearns was another big problem. They were not a bank. And luckily for the country, JP Morgan was strong enough to step in and kind of bail them out. The biggest failure of all, the biggest bailout, was AIG, which is neither a brokerage firm or a bank, was an insurance company. But you don't see a whole lot of regulation of insurance companies. So there are a lot of soft spots left in the regulatory framework that need to be addressed. But I think as the collapse of Lehman Brothers demonstrated, we can't afford to let a huge financial institution that's interconnected with so much of our economy, both nationally and globally, the world economy can't sustain that collapse, which is a real challenge.
I'm going to let Edwin have the last question from the audience, and then I've got a couple I'll wrap up with as we conclude our evening.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Livingstone. I have a question building upon the domestic questions of viability and banks being able to make it through the next couple of years, whatever may happen. What is your outlook on the global economy, say China, Russia, India, Brazil, as other economies playing against our economy here as City National is part of our national economy? How does that fit within the greater global economy?
Well, that's just another easy
Yeah,
question.
we ask
I
really
appreciate
simple
that.
questions around here that are easy to answer. Yeah.
That's like, the bonus question. But luckily, City National has in its wealth management group a lot of investments for clients that are internationally focused. And we do a lot to kind of look at the global economy and think it's important for people to diversify their investments. Even though the U.S. stock market in particular has performed very well this year, that's not always the case. You know, I actually think that while obviously your question is challenging and the answer is complex, I mean, in brief, there's a lot of dynamic economic growth going on in the rest of the world, and it's got its issues. But you know, countries like Indonesia, Brazil, I've talked to people just recently. You go back to Stan's question about information. I mean, I sat with a guy that I know that's in the process of making a big investment in Indonesia. Indonesia has 250 million people, I think. It's, I think, the largest Muslim country in the world, and very dynamic economy, tremendous natural resources. Brazil is another country, much of Latin America. Mexico's economy is doing very well in a variety of ways. China, I mean, you could spend an hour or more on each of these countries. There are going to be ups and downs, for sure, complexities, challenges. But, you know, what I said at the close of my remarks, this is a fabulous time in the history of the world. More people are coming out of poverty. I saw the other day, you know, they may have a vaccine for malaria. You've got private charities like the Gates Foundation, the Clinton Foundation. So I'm actually optimistic about what's happening in a lot of parts of the world. I'm very concerned about what's happening, as I think most Americans are, about what's happening in the Middle East and what that means and the political and economic threats. but I think the broad trend of history and economic development is very positive for any number of reasons. And that it's prudent, if you invest through City National, to invest in some of those areas.
So a little bit lighter question. Tell us about the ladder logo and where that came from.
Thank you for asking me that. You know, I said something about that I hadn't been a banker my whole life. And so when I came into the bank, actually my son, who was then, gosh, like 12 or something, had warned me about this. He said, "Dad, what are you going to do when," he calls him Grandpa, comes in and says, "Here, put this on your lapel." Well, the thing on the lapel in 1995 looked like, hopefully you guys know what a Pac-Man is. It was
Yeah.
CN. It was sort of looked like a mouth that was going to gobble you up. And it meant nothing to anybody. And to this day, I've asked bankers, and nobody can explain to me why bankers seem to feel compelled to have a lapel pin for their little bank. But everybody's got one, so they do it. So that's what we had. It
Had
was
to
the
have a
corporate
lapel pin,
logo.
yeah.
So, and nobody ever asked me about it. It was just kind of there, but I did it because, you know, I was trying to fit into the culture.
sure.
And, you know. Anyway, about a year or so later, I decided it was time to get a new advertising agency. And so we put it out a competition and saw a bunch of agencies, and that's a whole story in and of itself. But one agency had 2 campaigns they offered to us, and one of the 2 campaigns was a blue ladder. And it said, and the ad was going to be a big blue ladder, and it just would say, City National Bank, the way up. And for a bunch of reasons, which I could explain if we had more time, that's the one I picked. And it really seemed to work. It really caught people's attention. So I said one day to somebody in our marketing department, could you make up a few blue ladders as pins, and let's see what happens. And I really liked it because the ladder, it isn't something about the corporation.
Right.
It's about the client. What's the way up for you? And we'll help you on your way up. So about 10 of us, I dragooned 9 other people, put these ladders on their lapel, and all of a sudden,
Everybody wanted a ladder.
everybody's asked, hey, what's with that ladder? It was sufficiently garish that people asked us, and it was a big hit. And so it was pretty easy then to say, you know what, we're going to junk the CN, and we changed the logo of our company to the blue ladder, and that's why the pins are all blue ladders.
Very good. And my closing question, the really important burning question of the evening, who are your picks for the World Series and who's going to win? Given that you have a background in baseball.
Well, I'm desperately hoping that the Red Sox play the Dodgers.
And are you going to commit to a team you prefer to win in that?
Well, my best
matchup?
friend is chairman of the Red
Right,
Sox, so I
exactly.
want to see the Red Sox win in 7 games.
Oh, okay. Very good.
They reversed the curse, and so I'm hoping they'll do it again. But if you're a baseball fan, this is the best month of the year, and there's some great games. It's exciting. And since I don't own the Padres anymore, you know, I'll tell you a funny thing. So I grew up as a Dodger fan.
Right.
You know, to be a Jewish kid in LA in the 60s and have Sandy Koufax pitching for a team that's winning the World Series, that's about as good as it gets.
Pretty exciting.
And it was really great. And I always thought the Dodgers were great history. Jackie Robinson's a great hero for so many of us. But as I signed the check to Mrs. Kroc, I realized the error of my ways, and I became a Padres fan overnight. And then when I sold the Padres, I still care about the Padres. I still like the Dodgers. I like the Giants. Our bank has tickets to the Giants.
Right.
So I'm kind of agnostic, but I have a special spot for the Red Sox.
Well, that's certainly understandable. Well, Russell, thank you so much for just being so genuine and open with us and sharing your perspective. We really appreciate it. It's been a wonderful evening together.
Well, you're more than generous to let me go on and on with my views, so it's a pleasure to have a chance to do that. Thanks very
Wonderful.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.
So a couple of things before we go. I want to thank Villa Grazia Dio, our executive conference center here, for helping sponsor the evening, as well as Herbalife. And we actually have a drawing. We're going to give away a couple of things from Herbalife here. Phil's going to come down and help me. I do want to introduce Cindy Alush, I think. Wave, Cindy. Where's Cindy? There you go. Cindy's actually on our board, and she's good friends with Russell and his bank and everything, and so we're glad to have you with us. And Michael Williams at the back is one of our associate deans, so we're glad to have Michael here, but appreciate certainly having all of you with us this evening. So we've got a drawing, and we're drawing for, we'll let Russell draw tickets out for us. Okay, we're going to start with, this was the 75th anniversary book about Pepperdine, so we will give that away first. So if you'll draw a ticket out, and you guys get your tickets out, because we're going to call, they have names on them, I think, as well as numbers. And I'm making you do this to see if you can actually read the names on there, because I find it challenging sometimes.
It's very challenging. How about if I just say Cindy Alush and we call it a day?
There you go.
If I'm reading this right, it looks like Mi Ying Lee. Is that right?
Very
Great.
good. Here we go. Come on down. Yeah, stay up. We'll take a picture of everybody together at the end. Okay, what's our next gift, Phil? LA Galaxy, autographed by all of the Galaxy members.
Wow.
So this is our, come on down and grab your book, and we'll see who wins the Galaxy
That's
jersey.
a great-looking jersey.
It is. There you go.
Amazingly, it says Russell Goldsmith.
That is amazing how that worked out,
it's
isn't it? That
uncanny.
is really impressive that you did that.
Yeah. M. Yap King, is that?
Emye. She slipped out. Okay, we better draw another name.
Oh, if you're not here, you don't win, right?
That's right.
Then I have a chance.
You do have another chance, yes.
So does Cindy. Yizan Zhang.
All right. Very good. Excellent. All right.
There you go.
And we also have a special gift for you. I don't know if we took you around the front. We have a statue of George Grazia Dio out front, and so we give to all our speakers a replica of the statue out front of George Grazia Dio. I don't know if you want a competitor's picture sitting on your shelf in your office, but we hope you'll think kindly of us as you take this back. So
I do. Well, since he sold the bank, it's okay.
It's okay. It's okay. There you go. But thank you so
great.
much
Thanks,
for being
actually,
here and being a part of it.
That's very special.
We appreciate it. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.